right, Assalamu alaikum, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome to the, inshallah, closing session of Surah Ali Imran. I have to say that it's Christmas here, and of course, people are away and people are busy doing things. But I'm so grateful to be here. Of all the places, if I were to be given a wish that I could be doing anything, anywhere at this moment, there is really nowhere else I would rather be than here, learning the last bit of Surah Ali Imran. And, it's special for me as a convert, and I want to say, maybe I can tell my little Christmas story, because now I'm coming on 28 years as a convert, and certainly growing up, Christmas was, of course, magical and the most important time. And I was an only child, and so I was tasked with always decorating the tree by myself. My parents would make a point of taking me to get a tree, but I would put the decorations up and take them down. And my favorite thing would be when my parents would go to bed, I would sit in the living room by myself and just stare at the Christmas lights but I think it was a very long time, and just contemplating life and things. This is as a young person, and now when I look back on that time, I remember staring at the tree and always sort of wishing and hoping and always sort of feeling that there was something missing in life. I think as an only child, you are sort of regularly lonely, and you feel like you dream a lot about what your life might become when you're older, and and also holidays tend to make you think about things that either make you sad or wistful or things like that, at least for me. And so looking back now on those times, I recognize that a lot of times that loneliness or that feeling of emptiness is, as we've talked about here in the halakas in Project Illumine, is sort of a longing for God, and it's sort of a hopefulness, searching for something that would fill that sort of visceral emptiness in your stomach that you often have, and especially when you're not sure what's out there, what's in the world, what's going to happen, and all of that. I recognize that it was a longing for meaning and a longing for God, and so I happily now think back that obviously God was with me at those moments, when I was by myself staring at the Christmas tree and wondering what my life would become. And here I am now, excited to be, as a Muslim, studying, the finishing bit of Surah Ali Imran. But it's, God really granted my wish, which was to find meaning and purpose. And to be here studying the Quran in this way is a dream for me, a dream come true, because being in search for meaning and purpose, there is no greater meaning than when you can connect finally with the holy book of your chosen faith, and with the conversion and all the things that come with it, and to finally feel like after 28 years of knowing the Quran but not really knowing the Quran, to actually feel like, oh my God, now I'm starting to understand the deeper meaning in a way that I never thought that I could. And I say this because I know that Christmas is a difficult time, especially for converts. And I know that one of the issues when I converted was thinking about, what would my relationship now with Christmas become? Because I had so many memories attached to it. And, in America, it's not religious so much as it is celebrational, cultural. It's a time when people are happy, they're giving gifts. But, on the flip side, too, it's a lonely time for people. There's a lot of emotion wrapped up in it. So when you become a convert and you become a Muslim and you think back on that, and you think about your family, and you think about all of the things that are connected to Christmas, and you start thinking about, okay, how am I going to let go of that emotional attachment? How can I really become Muslim when I have so much of my heart invested in Christmas and all that it represents? And I think that the beautiful thing, now we we deal with a lot of the stupidity of people, getting into arguments on social media about whether Muslims are allowed to say Merry Christmas or not, and how, this is haram or that is haram, and which to me actually is quite an affront, and offensive, considering there are, Muslims in China in, prison camps, genocide going on in Burma, about to be in India, in Yemen, I mean Palestine, all the places that you can imagine that are Muslim lands. And certainly American Muslims on social media are talking about whether or not they should wish happiness to people who associate a lot of happiness with Christmas. I mean, that's ridiculous and stupid to me. But for people who genuinely are wondering, like, okay, how should I feel about, like, converts, alhamdulillah, I feel like once I started to really understand what was important and meaningful in life, and I recognized that Christmas was often, I mean, it's a happy time, it's full of lights and all of that, but it's not a religious celebration in Christian America so much as it is a way for us to give material gifts. It's like Hallmark cards are good for commercial purposes. I mean, it's very commercial, and it represents something that is very antithetical to what is truly beautiful about being Muslim and Islam. And I feel like a lot of these conversations that people engage in about saying Merry Christmas and not are silly too, because if you truly believe that God knows what's in your heart and God is with you and God knows your intentions, whether you say Merry Christmas or not, that the substance is really what matters. And I have no problem saying Merry Christmas to people who find that an expression of love and kindness and joy. And I feel that that is the beautiful ethic that we as Muslims should share, is, recognizing that others gain happiness and joy from that. And it's nothing off of us to do that. We should do that. We should be creating goodness and happiness and joy. So, I mean, I say all of this sort of like thinking this is really silly. This doesn't really need to be said, but considering what I've seen, on social media, maybe it does need to be said. That I think our purpose here is to try and bring happiness and joy and smiles wherever we can to whomever we can. And that, as a convert, if you feel conflicted, I don't think you should. You should just focus on bringing joy and know that God knows what's in your heart, and just, ignore all the garbage and stupidity that you hear elsewhere. So anyway, like I said, I can't think of anywhere else I would rather be than spending time knowing more about God's book and what God has to say about us, about all the generations that came before, about what God wants for us as Muslims to build and to aspire for and to create in our time, our very short time on earth. And I'm happy that people are joining us, and whether you watch this now with us or at a later date on our recording, I wish you all the joy of the holiday season, because it's undeniable that it's a time when people are happy being with family, appreciating the time off and the slowing down of life. And there's always so much good to be grateful for, and I'm grateful for being here. So thank you so much, and inshallah, I'm looking forward to an amazing session. Inshallah, we will conclude tonight, Surah Imran.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. الذي هدانا الكتاب والحكمة الذي هدانا الكتاب والحكمة فهل نحن مسلمون؟ وهل نحن مقبلون؟ وهل نحن مستمعون؟ وهل نحن مصدقون؟ الحمد لله وسبحانه ما عظم شانه مالك الملك يؤتي الملك من يشاء ويعز من يشاء ويذل من يشاء بغير حساب. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم كل ما في الأرض وما في السماء طائع له مستسلم له، فهل نحن مسلمون؟ ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على الحبيب المصطفى القدوة القدوة المعلم الأعظم الحبيب الأول هادي البشر المرسل رحمة للعالمين خاتم الأنبياء والرسل أجمعين. فألف صلاة وتسليم على آل البيت الأطهار الميامين وعلى أصحابه الطيبين وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي يا رب. اللهم يا علي يا عظيم يا رب العالمين، أنت تعلم ما بنا وما نحن فيه، لك الملك ولك الأمر ونحن لك طائعون. فيا رب رحماك رحماك، لطفك بنا يا علي يا عظيم. اللهم لا تكلفنا إلا وسعنا، اللهم لا تكلفنا إلا وسعنا، اللهم لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا، ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا، ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا، ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا. يا رب ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به، واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا، أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. At the outset, I apologize for starting late because I haven't been feeling well, and I'm struggling a bit. So, you recall from last halaqah that Allah tells us something noteworthy about sorrow. We know from human experience, we often say things like, when it rains, it pours. When something goes wrong, many have noticed that it tends to be when things go wrong, one after the other, they compound. And Allah tells us that that is actually not accidental, that that is quite intentional. أثابكم غما بغم, that the compounding of sorrows is in fact the process that tests your mettle, cleanses your elements, and offers you an opportunity for elevation. It is the very nature of ease that changes when you are tested by an accumulation of pain and challenges. The ultimate dynamic and interaction is not to comfort you that the cause of your sorrow will eventually go away and be replaced with something that is the opposite to it, but to get you to understand that it is all in your mind. How do you react to sorrow? It's not an issue of whether sorrow exists or not, because life will bring you plenty of painful situations. But the focus should be on you and the way you construct your being. And taking seriously the idea that often hardship is actually a sign that you are in God's gaze rather than that you are forgotten by God. Because those, as the Prophet ﷺ says, who find the doors of wealth and comfort open up to them, it's often a very bad sign. It's not a good sign. It's often a sign that they're people of the dunya and God sort of looked elsewhere. And at the same time, understand that God doesn't allow a calamity to fall upon you without it being rooted in some failure on your part. That أولما أصابتكم مصيبة قد أصبتم مثليها قلتم أن هذا قل هو من عند أنفسكم إن الله على كل شيء قدير. If you are wondering why, then look within, because you will find that there is a a seed, a basic central foundation that explains why this calamity fell upon you in particular and affects you the way it affects you in particular. And as we said, the rather tough question, the really tough question of, okay, I understand this is something that in some way, to some degree, I called upon myself. I deserved. And by 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 virtue of that fact, it is a pressure cooker moment. It's a moment where you confront, what is my role? What is the lesson? What does the gham, bigham, the levels of sorrow that are being placed on your head are supposed to tell you? There are people in many parts of the world, unfortunately the undeveloped world, militaries will enter into war and will effectively lose the war. And all they become concerned with is cover up, to hide the extent of the calamity from their countrymen, or to come up with every excuse other than we are the problem, we deserved it. And that's precisely the type of attitude that Al Imran is disabusing Muslims of from the beginning. This level of compounded sorrow is very important to learn from. But what is particularly important is to learn your role as in Eucharist for bringing on these calamities upon yourself. So it could be, for instance, in a military campaign, your lack of accountability, your lack of transparency. It could be corruption. It could be injustice in dealing with so many people over the years. There could be a million different reasons, and it could be all of them. But even at the individual level, if you don't ask that core question, not to self-flagellate and say, I deserved it, but to ask the question, in what ways have I sparked it, instigated it? In what ways have I called it upon myself? In what ways does this calamity move me forward? Okay. And Allah reminds us of something that is particularly difficult for believers during periods of transformation, because we imagine an ant that is born and lives, and the lifespan of the ant allows it to understand the universe from its perspective. And regardless of how intelligent Allah makes an ant is, the circumstances of her lifespan creates a body of knowledge that it cannot go beyond. You know, why is it that some ants, as they're going around performing their jobs, suddenly a mysterious force comes down from the heavens and crushes a whole bunch of them and kills them? You know, it sounds like cosmic, and if ants thought this way. And ultimately, what we know about how long ant hives or plantations go on for and so on, an ant sees such a small picture of the matter. Likewise, think of Muslims in Spain. They go into Spain, they dominate political and social and cultural life in Spain for about 800 years. After the Reconquista, we are suddenly aware of the Spanish people who are not only expel Muslims from Spain, but even go beyond and become a major colonial power. Very few people think about what was the state of the Spanish people for the 800 years before the crumbling of the Muslim state. Imagine how many Spaniards born in this 800 years, how many were born confronted by utter frustration, believing, how in God's name does this thriving civilization that Muslims have in Spain ever going to change? We are on the margins. We live in mountainous areas between Spain and France, and there is really no hope. The sad thing is that you take the individual who lived during a century of absolute ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment on part of the Spaniard people. Well, their perspective on God's promise, at least as they believe it, is very different than someone who took place in the Reconquista and turned Spain into a colonial power. Now, I say this because notice in 159, this promise that was repeated in the Quran many times إن ينصركم الله فلا غالب لكم وإن يتخذ وإن يخذلكم فمن ذا الذي ينصركم من بعده وعلى الله فليتوكل المؤمنون. إن ينصركم الله فلا غالب لكم وإن يخذلكم فمن ذا الذي ينصركم من بعده وعلى الله فليتوكل المؤمنون. So this promise that if Allah comes to your side, you cannot be defeated. But if Allah doesn't, you will be defeated. Of course, and you have to confront this, that one of the major causes of apathy, lack of principles, lack of seriousness, lack of deliberation, lack of conscientiousness, lack of commitment, lack of faith is that you are a Muslim born in a period like the Spaniard porn in a century where Muslims looked like they were going to be in Spain forever. You can't see how things are going to change. If you read literature written by Spaniards after the Muslim conquest of Spain, not only was there despair, but there were constant complaints by the clergy that Spaniards were losing their identity, that Spaniards thought that the cool thing would convert to Islam and learn Arabic, and that Spaniards hardly would use their own language or refer to their own scholars that were infatuated by the language and the culture of their conquerors. And they would bemoan and bewail that, it's all over. There's just no hope. Very, very, very different. Fast forward 600 years, very different from what their writing said a few hundred years later, where they are full of enthusiasm. They are bragging that most Muslims pay them the jizya, not the other way around. They see the expulsion of Muslims from Spain on the horizon. This is one of the biggest challenges for so many Muslims. Is that if they don't have that awareness that this period that we're living in is not a period of victories. You are not expected to achieve any victory in anything. What you are expected to do is to think very seriously how you can be part of the solution to emerge out of the state rather than part of the problem. That's the challenge. That's the challenge. If you're a doctor and you spend a lot of money to throw a fancy wedding for your children, spend a lot of money to educate your children, spend a lot of money to build live in a fancy home, spend a lot of money to make sure your children are taken care of and your wife is taken care of for many, many years to come. And on the side, you go attend some meetings, chit-chat, you're chit-chatting with people like you, doctors, engineers, who basically know nothing about anything other than their professions. You are part of the problem. And so when the gham ala gham comes, and you ask Allah, why is this happening? Well, it's happening because of you. Let me be very blunt about this, because I am just, if I don't testify, I will be held accountable. I've been saying this now for 30 years. I've arrived in LA, I've watched lavish weddings thrown by Indian families, Pakistani families, Palestinian families, Syrian families, Egyptian families. And the same people who you go to and say, support a publication project, who give you an absolute headache. Sponsor a student so you can educate a student, give you absolute headache. Listen, pay attention. Pay attention. The same people who will post on their Instagram pictures of the fancy decoration in their weddings, the fancy food in their weddings, or their social events, whatever. Pictures that demonstrate wealth, at-tafakhur, wat-takabbur, communicate status. Look how wonderful, how much we splurged and paid, and look at all the wonderful dessert, and they will not post a single picture of happy, smiling Syrian orphans that they've taken care of. I ask you, I know it's ridiculous to say this, but put yourself in Allah's shoes. You created these people, you gave them the Quran, you gave them the Prophet Muhammad, you even gave them an annoying human being like Khalid Abul Fadl to keep after them. And Allah inspired some intellects to create something like Instagram. And you know very well what Islamophobes are posting in their Instagram. You know very well what the supporters of Israel and those people with a cause that is anti-Muslim cause post on their Facebook and Instagram. If you don't, you can check it out for yourself. I can tell you that these people never post anything about their luxury events. If it happens, if they hide it, they're ashamed of it. They post pictures about their meeting with politicians. They post pictures about new settlements in the Holy Land. They post pictures about how they violated the sanctity of the Aqsa Mosque. But I've never seen, never, they might post pictures of what's her face, post pictures of herself wearing a bikini and going to swim in the ocean. But she does that to annoy Muslims. But I've never seen this grotesque materialist practice of saying, look at our decor, look at our architecture, look at how much we spent on food, Look at how much we spent on decorations. Look at how much we splurged. At the same time, Allah is fully aware of that money that you spent and what this money could have done. Could have done. As the winter now is here and thousands upon thousands of children and women and are freezing to death every day. That same account, you, my dear Muslim, has not posted. Where you actually become a good moral example. I am taking care of these orphans, and I've sent them money, and because I can tell you from experience, they are so grateful that they actually put your name on little signs, and they're filmed holding up the signs. Little children, thank you, so on. So they know that you're for the money that you're sending, you are allowing them to eat, you're allowing them to be clothed, you're allowing them to be saved. And then we say, why Allah? Why are we like this? Why are we mistreated so badly? Well, it's bima fi anfusikum. It's because of what is in you. That's the problem. If you think it's justified to spend $30,000, wallahi, I attended a wedding in LA. This was back in the 90s. A Muslim family. The bill for that wedding was $1 million back in the early 90s. $1 million. Personally, I had a disagreement with an imam. I won't name him out of respect. He was invited to do the Aqd Quran. I said I won't attend the wedding. We are Ummatul Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar. I cannot attend a wedding. Well, maybe they donate enough. Okay, well, their philanthropy is public knowledge because they've created a non-profit organization for philanthropy. And according to public records, their philanthropy for the same year they spent $1 million on the wedding was $30,000 total for everything, including money to Impact, money to the Islamic Center of Southern California, money. Younger people come and say, "Oh, are you saying that the solution is as simple as that?" Yeah, I'm saying the solution is simple as that. It is. You don't need, to go attend Harvard to come up with fancy theories, to be able to think through things. Simple, basic, fundamental morality and humanity holds so many answers. again, when I was in LA, I knew a lot of Muslim families that would say invite you to breakfast or invite you to dinner or invite you to lunch. And it was very, very common. No, I mean, it didn't even raise an eyebrow. Breakfast, $150 for two people. Lunch, 200 people, $200 for two people. Dinner, $350 for two people. And those same people, you come and ask for a donation for to allow a widow to pay her rent, to allow an orphan to buy basic necessity or obtain legal representation for an orphan, and we're haggling over $500. The same people that I've went to lunch with many times. Of course, I can't afford to pay the bill, but they do. They pay it. And every time I sort of like look at the bill, and I'm just, my my question to you, my question to you: If Allah, if it is true that these are our personality traits, and these are our characteristics, if Allah then comes and supports us and aids us and makes us victorious, rather than the people who have a wrong cause because they want to colonize the lands of Muslims, but they're freaking serious. They don't waste their money this way. They're darn serious. They might be very stingy. You go out to lunch with them and they say, let's split the bill. This happened to me a million times. We go out to lunch to the faculty club, not anything fancy. They say, let's split the bill. But those same people, when it comes to building the Hillel on campus, the same professors, $30 million was raised to build the Hillel on campus from the same professors who were splitting a $20 lunch bill with me. The same people, when tensions with Gaza occurred, the first thing you say, and this is the friend that I know, said, oh, my wife in my car keeps breaking up, my wife, but, I'm going to have to put off, I told her, we have to put off buying a new car because Israel is in crisis and it needs us. So, I gave my savings to donate it to Israel. So we're going to have to just stay with the old car for another 6 months or a year. You tell me, if you were God, what would you do? If you're a just God, what would you do? But what I want everyone to understand, it is a personal responsibility. You can't change the world unless you change yourself and change your family. There's no such thing as, oh, people are horrible, but, I'm going to overlook what I do and what my family does. It always starts with you and your family. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. After then reminding the Prophet ﷺ that although the challenges confronted, to say the least, are numerous, polemics by Christian and Jewish groups, hypocrites that withdrew from battle, causing a major psychological blow, and in the aftermath of Uhud, the complications abound and become even more complicated. And as we said, that Allah comes in and tells the Prophet that لنت لهم فبما رحمة من الله لنت لهم, that remember, it is Allah's blessings that orients your heart towards those people in a kind and generous and warm way. And remember that despite all these challenges, if you were obnoxious and rude and unfeeling, hard-hearted, فظا غليظ القلب. غليظ القلب is someone who's just not very empathetic. So you would find that the results would be far more negative. But so what should your attitude be is فاعف عنهم واستغفر لهم وشاورهم. Ask Allah to forgive them. You yourself forgive them. And continue consulting with them, i.e., empowering them in this process. Okay. Then we dealt with 160. With 161, there comes, it says, ما كان لنبي أن يغل ومن يغلل يأتي بما غل يوم القيامة ثم توفى كل نفس بما كسبت ثم تولى كل نفس ما كسبت وهم لا يظلمون. Now, Muhammad Asad translates it as, it is not conceivable that a prophet should deceive, since he who deceives shall be faced with his deceit on the day of resurrection. I mean, al-ighlal is a form of deceit, but al-ighlal is it's not necessarily deceit, but al-ighlal is a form of being iniquitous, unfair, and in a way that might make people think that something deceitful or dishonest is going on. And of course, the question is, why does this ayah come in and say this about the Prophet ﷺ? And there are a couple of narratives or a couple of reports that we know of that talk about this. One of these reports says that in I believe it was the Battle of Badr, not Uhud, that there was a piece of red velvet cloth, a piece of fabric that you would make into a dress or in some form of clothing, and that it went missing from the spoils of war, and that rumors started spreading. You can predict who's spreading these rumors, that the Prophet ﷺ took that piece for himself. And it turns out that he didn't. And some reports say that, well, this was revealed to answer this situation and to say that, how could you have thought that the Prophet would have just lifted this for himself? A second set of reports say, no, what happened is that in the Battle of Uhud, the old Arab traditional rule was, when it comes to spoils of war, is that whoever kills a person is entitled to their spoils. So you kill person X, then you're the one entitled to their sword, their shield, their helmet, possibly their horse, if they have one, or if they were fighting on a camel, their camel, and any other valuables that might have been found on the person of the person you've killed. That's the old pre-Islamic rule. And that in Badr, the Prophet ﷺ didn't change that rule. And that's precisely what happened, is that whoever would kill someone, they're entitled to their spoils. And that in the Battle of Uhud, that contributed to the chaos, that contributed to the decision of the arrowmen to abandon their posts, because they figured, well, by the time we get down, all the spoils would have been taken by the people on the battlefield. And according to these reports, is that Allah comes in and says that this is a form of ghulul, to allow people to just grab whatever, to grab the material of the person they've killed, that's a form of ghulul, meaning a form of extreme injustice or inequity. And after this ayah, the decision was made that no one is allowed to take something, regardless of whether you've killed the person or not, but rather that all the spoils of war, all the shields, swords, horses, camels, whatever existed in the battlefield, would go to a central point and then distributed evenly among the fighters in the battle. And that was the occasion for revelation, is that basically this revelation ended up the process of individual collections of spoils of war. There is something to both reports, because we know that this is, in fact, was the practice in Badr, and the practice in Uhud changed. after Uhud changed. It was for spoils of war. We it is possible um, that the first story is also true about the red velvet, whatever, and then they eventually found it. But I'm skeptical that they had anything to do with the revelation of the verse. Um, the Quranic prescription or statement that ما كان لنبي أن يغل ومن يغل يأتي بما غل يوم القيامة ثم توفى كل نفس ما كسبت وهم لا يظلمون أفمن اتبع رضوان الله كمن باء بسخط من الله ومأواهم جهنم وبئس المصير هم درجات عند الله والله بصير بما يعملون. This statement, though, seems to me to have a different connotation than the one that the traditional tafsirs have given. يغل يغل can also have another meaning than being unjust or uh, dishonest. يغل can also mean bearing a grudge. So even in contemporary Arabic, we say when someone is seizing with resentment, you say maghlul. And if you want to say, so, there's a common Arabic expression, idiomatic expression, mut bighillak, like die with your seizing jealousy. And if you look at the context of this ayah, it seems that the meaning that fits much better is that once Allah told the Prophet ﷺ, forgive them and consult with them, Allah comes to the Prophet and says, yeah, I know, listen, you were betrayed, 1/3 of the army withdrew, you were disobeyed, a lot of your friends got killed, you got injured. I'm sure, the injury was hurting him for quite a while. After all, he was struck with a sword right on his face and shajja so that it opened up his skull and dislocated his shoulder. And Allah comes and says, it is not acceptable for a prophet, and yaghul means not acceptable for a prophet to hold a grudge. Not acceptable to make it a personal issue of, well, who hurt me and who hurt my friends. This is precisely why when Al-Habashi, the man who killed the Prophet's uncle, Hamza, comes later, much later on, and asked for forgiveness, the Prophet ﷺ is bound to give it and say, okay, you're a Muslim brother. Because Allah said to him, Al-Ghulul is not a right path. Okay. Now, as we're leading to the closing matters in Ali Imran, so then Allah reminds Muslims, okay, I understand that you went through quite a trauma, and you feel a great deal of guilt for having failed your prophet. You feel a great deal of guilt about those who were martyred defending the prophet. And that type of trauma, and especially when people, cover up trauma by being argumentative and trying to project blame on others. So Allah comes and reminds them of what the role of the prophet between them, amongst them is. So, لقد من الله على المؤمنين إذ بعث فيهم رسولا من أنفسهم يتلو عليهم الكتاب والحكمة يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين أولما أصابتكم مصيبة قد أصبتم مثليها قلتم أن هذا قل هو من عند أنفسكم إن الله على كل شيء قدير. This is 164, 165. So Allah comes back and says, understand the role of this prophet amongst you is that he is a conveyor of message, but this is a man who also, his counsel is to purify you, and to purify you in Allah's eye, and to bring you the book, the revelation, and wisdom, and that without him you were lost. So redirect your energies from your tendency to become distracted inside marginal feuds with one another to the core issue that this man is a rare opportunity for you to truly transform your life on the basis of the book and wisdom. And this is precisely why it's followed by وَإِذَا أَصَابَتْكُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ. Do you, now that a calamity has befallen you, after you have had inflicted twice as much on your foes, ask yourselves, how has this come about? Say, it has come from your own selves. So, I know that your whole thing is confusion and wanting to understand who's to blame and going through the failures of this defeat. The representative of morality and principle amongst you is the constant, is the stable fact. The variables is the way that you are responsible for your own conduct. So, because often when people go wrong, instead of blaming themselves, they blame the idea itself. Well, I am not a failure, but the Quran is a failure. This is how doubt creeps in into the hearts of so many Muslims, right? Well, it's not me, it's the teachings. And quite remarkably, the Quran comes in and anticipates this whole entire thing, and it says, look within. It is not about the role of the Prophet. Um, it is about what weaknesses within you, what issues within you has cumulatively led to this experiencing this defeat. And 167, Allah then deals with, again, another social reality present in Medina at the time, is that those who said, قالوا لو نعلم قتالا لاتبعناكم. So a group of people having who did not fight either came back with Abdullah ibn Ubay or never went out in the battle itself, started saying, well, our excuse is that وَلَوْ نَعْلَمُ قِتَالًا. وَلَوْ نَعْلَمُ قِتَالًا has been wrongly translated by so many as if we knew how to fight, we would have joined you. But وَلَوْ نَعْلَمُ قِتَالًا actually meant something very different in this context. It meant if we knew that there's going to be a fight, we would have joined you. It's sort of like, the macho speak. Oh, I didn't really take seriously that there was going to be a battle. But if I knew there was going to be a battle, I would have been there. I would have done, marvelous things. And Allah sort of chides them, but in a way that it deserves pause. So it says, هم للكفر يومئذ أقرب منهم للإيمان. When they were saying stuff like that, when they were feeling like that, they were closer to kufr than closer to iman. It's a very, these are not hypocrites. These were weak people who deluded themselves, lied to themselves. And it is, if you have a conscience, this would bother you a lot, because it's telling you, when you were feeling like this, you were really more kafir than Muslim. And so if you have a conscience, you'd say, oh my God, who would want that? Of course, it wouldn't work with the munafiqun. And again, so you see how the Quran talks to different people in a measured, selective, and effective way. Because Allah knows that they are saying what is not in their heart. Allah knows what is in their heart, and Allah knows that they are, in their hearts, they're cowards, they're scared. Okay. And one of the most important passages in Ali Imran is ولا تحسبن الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله أمواتا بل أحياء عند ربهم يرزقون. The affirmation is saying to us, you guys think death is the greatest tragedy. Yes, death is a tragedy if it is for the wrong reason, because then you've wasted life. But understand that those who fight for a just cause, for a proper purpose, for an Islamically legitimate cause, their death doesn't mean death as you know it. What does that mean? Are they fully conscious right now from the moment they're dead till the hereafter? Are they semi-conscious? Are what is it precisely? We don't know. But what Allah is saying is that for these people, death is not death. It goes beyond the realm of your reality, where people are either alive or dead. That's what our life on this world has grown us accustomed to. Someone is either alive or dead. There's no in between. And in the dimensions of reality in which God exists, none of this necessarily needs to hold, that you're either alive or dead. But you could be something else. But Allah assures us that it is not the type of fate that you think it is. That it is not a horrible conclusion to a human being. Okay. Now, notice Ayah 172. الذين استجابوا لله والرسول من بعد ما أصابهم القرح للذين أحسنوا منهم واتقوا أجر عظيم. 172, what it's talking about are the group of people. Remember the group of 70 people that went after, hurt, injured, bleeding, went after the battle of Uhud with the Prophet ﷺ to send a message of strength to the Meccans. So Allah praises this group in this ayah, and that's why, those who answered the call of Allah and His Prophet after they've been hurt. And notice something in the Quran that is rather consistent. Cowardliness and greed and self-centeredness, being focused solely on the self regardless of, are always connected to some shaitani influence. إنما ذلكم الشيطان يخوف أولياءه فلا تخافوهم وخافوني وإن كنتم مؤمنين. That these types of compromised states that you go through, don't kid yourself, these are states, shaitani states. But shaitan doesn't have dominion over awliyaullah. Waliullah, remember, Waliullah is someone who's very close to Allah, Khalilullah. Someone who is, as Quran puts it, is in Allah's eyes. Someone who's sold life on earth, meaning doesn't care about life on earth and focus solely on their relationship with Allah. And so they grew ever closer to Allah until Allah loves them and they love Allah. Shaitan has no authority over awliyaullah. But shaitan has, and by shaitan is symbolic because there are many shayateen. And there are shayateen who are human and there are shayateen who are jinn. But all of these shayateen dwell in the realm of the things that Ali Imran points out to you as consistent sources of problems. Now, note, as Ali Imran goes on to emphasize that this project, this demanding standard that Ali Imran, which we inshallah summarize, has set out, is not possible without all the things that the Quran keeps emphasizing. That is solid faith, a solid belief, constant state of dhikr, and sacrifice of material things. We then come to so we come to 180. Part of the polemics, as you would expect, that as Medina and the inhabitants of Medina have consistently confronted, this is from Badr and Uhud, consistently confronted tough economic circumstances. Mecca has boycott against Medina. Mecca has a standing agreement with its Arab tribes, the tribes that trade with Mecca, that they're not allowed to trade in Medina. If you do trade in Medina, then you are not welcome in Mecca markets. This influences Medina economy in very serious ways. But moreover, Mecca has the power to do something, and that is when Mecca imposed this embargo upon all the tribes surrounding Medina. Medina started thinking, there were certain people in Medina started thinking, well, listen, we used to rely on the caravans organized by Mecca to reach as far away as India and Ceylon and what is today Afghanistan, and also countries like Egypt. And so if the Meccans are going to impose this embargo on us, why don't we go beyond and extend our trade routes to reach these faraway markets, because otherwise we're in trouble. Well, the Meccans, because they had better logistics, better network of informants, and better armed, more mobile and swift military, they were able to intercept most of the Medinian efforts at reaching faraway markets like India, Ceylon, even Sham, Egypt. Again, Put yourself in the place of people at that time. You're a native of Medina. You've lived there all your life. You're accustomed to certain standard of living. There is a problem now with business you used to do with Jewish tribes because of their animosity to this new religion. And you used to do business with Mecca and tribes around Mecca and Medina, and it brought you good money. So then you start thinking, okay, let's generate the capital, as difficult as it is, to trade with these faraway markets, and you're prevented from doing that. What do you think the psychological effect is going to be? If things about your faith and your commitments are not clear, if things are not clear in your heart and mind, you're going to say, what is this? You know, these people came to Medina and life is getting harder. How am I supposed to raise my children? War, boycotts, you know, now my income has gone down 90%, and we're always told you have to donate. Do you see? But that's the challenge. That's the challenge. The challenge is not to compromise principles so you can allow these businessmen to make money so they can get allied. It's to say to the businessmen, well, that's your jihad. And yes, you know, you have to get accustomed to a new standard of living, which includes taking care of those who have less than you. You see, if you teach the seerah according to the reality, historical reality of what happened, you will affect the morality and value systems of Muslims. Because the way we teach with seerah today, we get Muslims off the hook. We don't give them a sense of responsibility for what they are bearing. But if they understand the standard that they have to work against, then maybe. Yeah, sure, you're going to lose a lot of people who are munafiqun. Good riddance. But those who remain will be the ones who are worth it. So the Quran comes in 178, وَلَا يَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَنَّمَا نُمْلِي لَهُمْ خَيْرٌ لِأَنفُسِهِمْ إِنَّمَا نُمْلِي لَهُمْ لِيَزْدَادُوا إِثْمًا وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ. And then 171, وما كان الله ليظهر المؤمنين على ما أنتم عليه حتى يميز الخبيث من الطيب وما كان الله ليطلعكم على الغيب ولكن الله يجتبي من رسله من يشاء فآمنوا بالله ورسله وإن تؤمنوا وتتقوا فلكم أجر عظيم. So notice, it comes and it says, well, first understand, Allah knows that there are among you in Medina who made a special private deal for themselves, found that things are so difficult, and said, you know what, munafiqun, I don't care. I'm going to go and I am going to say to the Jewish tribes, count me in, please include my trade, tell the Qurayshis I'm not really committed to this man, get my business to Mecca. Others made special deals with the Meccans and said, listen, allow my caravan to reach Egypt, allow my caravan to reach Syria, and I'll give you a cut. And, this thing was Muhammad, it's between Muhammad and you guys. I personally, leave me out. Allah comes and says, because, of course, the merchants who sacrificed say, what is this? Our business is down the doldrums, and these guys are doing really well. And Allah comes and tells them, don't think that Allah doesn't know. And don't think that Allah ignores what they do or lets it proceed because of something that is good for them. Numli lahum. We are simply giving them an opportunity to see whether they will correct path. But their fate, whether in the here now or in the hereafter or both, is a miserable one. And it comes back and says, understand that for Allah, the critical issue is tamyiz al-khabith min al-tayyib. Is everything is structured in this world so that it becomes clear by the time you reach the end. Are you khabith? Are you foul? Or are you tayyib? Are you pure? Those who say, well, I am tayyib, I know I am tayyib, but Allah won't mind a little bit of khubth, a little bit of khabith here and there, then you're not tayyib. A tayyib is repulsed by khubth. It's like, listen, you can't say, I am clean, but I don't mind if I go around with poop on my clothes every once in a while. Then you're not clean. Cleanliness is a state. Yamiz al-khabith min al-tayyib. Understand that all of this, it is to make clear for the basic paradigm of witnessing, testimony, who can be attested to be khabith and who can be attested to be tayyib. Which do you want? What category do you wish to fall into? Remember again the beginning of Al Imran, the two parties. So it has taken you to a realization, full circle. The party that claims to be with God is the tayyib or the khabith. Obviously the tayyib. And the party that claims not to be with God is supposed to be the khabith. But you can't take that as a matter of belief and take it for granted. The party that claims to be with God has to be actually tayyib, not pretend to be tayyib. Okay. Then, just notice quickly 181. لقد سمع الله قول الذين قالوا إن الله فقير ونحن أغنياء سنكتب ما قالوا وقتلهم الأنبياء بغير حق ونقول ذوقوا العذاب الحريق وذوقوا عذاب الحريق. 181, when the Quran, when it was revealed in the Quran, saying, "Man ذا الذي يقرض الله قرضا حسنا," Allah is talking to believers, says, "Who will loan God a beautiful loan?" Meaning that when you give money, it's like loaning God, or that's the allegory that Allah uses. That loan, and that loan will be paid tenfold, manyfold, back to you in the hereafter. And Jewish tribes who were in the habit, them and the hypocrites, of composing ayat that mimics the Quran and mocks the Quran, part of their jeering and mocking was start saying, well, what type of allegory is this? Loan God? Well, it must be that God is poor and needs our loans. And so the Quran responds to this and says, I've heard you, and that's blasphemous, and Allah will pay you back for this type of insolence in the hereafter. 182 is the one that I've mentioned before. Is the again, the polemics with the Jews was that they said that in the Torah it's clear any prophet, any real prophet from God, would have burnt offerings. This is in Jewish law. It's a very big issue in Jewish law, that there has to be burnt offerings to the Lord. And since Muhammad is not doing burnt offerings, then he can't be a real prophet. And again, the Quran responds and says, this is nonsense. Where did you get this as a permanent sacred law? Okay. Now notice. So now we're coming towards the very end. And Ali Imran tells us something that we have to pay attention to. وَلَتُبْلَوَنَّ فِي أَمْوَالِكُمْ وَأَنفُسِكُمْ وَلَتَسْمَعُنَّ مِنَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ ومن الذين أشركوا أذى كثيرا وإن تصبروا وتتقوا فإن ذلك من عزم الأمور. Allah then comes and warns Muslims and says, brace yourself, because Allah knows that you will be tested in your money and you will be tested in yourselves, and that especially those who are people of the book and the mushrikeen, those who've simply not accepted Islam but don't belong to the people of the book, expect that you will hear from them أذى كثيرا. Let's for now say a lot of hurt, a lot of harm. وإن تصبروا وتتقوا فإن ذلك من عزم الأمور. But if you persevere and you hold on, then that's truly the virtuous thing. Notice that again, for the time that the Quran is revealed, Allah is telling them that those who have not accepted you, they're going to continue slandering and maligning and arguing with you. And the response is say, تصبروا وتتقوا. Persevere and taqwa. It is very interesting that the Quran doesn't And notice this, go back and study every instance, you'll see it. The Quran never recommends silencing the criticism. The Quran never says, go shut them up. Sometimes it says, respond kindly. Sometimes it says, walk away kindly. Sometimes it says, persevere. But it doesn't entertain the possibility of saying, shut up, I don't want to hear it. It was entirely conceivable in Medina at the time that the Prophet ﷺ, acting like all emperors of the time, all emperors, would have issued a royal decree. Anyone that talks about the following subjects will receive a death sentence. That wouldn't have raised an eyebrow. This is what they all did. But he didn't. We pass over something like this without asking the question of why. Why the Shura was Muslims and the allowing of the slandering by non-Muslims and saying respond to them or ignore them or be patient, but you'd never have, as we will see, silence them forcibly, coercively. But then the other thing is, many commentators said, this is not just mine, many commentators said that much of what Ali Imran says about Ali Kitab transcends the historical circumstance. And it is as if Allah is putting Muslims on notice forever that these polemics in which Islam is attacked will never end. And at the same time, Allah is putting you on notice that if these polemics weaken you, break you, then you have failed in the test of sabr and taqwa. Okay. Now, the 178 is about the charge of concealing that, as I showed you, that the Bible does mention the coming of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, which both Christians and Jews went to great lengths, even changing the translation of the Greek to deny that the Bible says someone called the praiseworthy will be the coming Messiah. One 188. ولا تحسبن الذين يفرحون بما أتوا ويحبون أن يحمدوا بما لم يفعلوا فلا تحسبنهم بمفازة من العذاب ولهم عذاب أليم. 188. This ayah, of course, it has a general tone, like that it talks about those who like to pretend they've done things which they haven't done in order to impress people and get praised. But more specifically, it was said that there were people who did not join the Battle of Uhud, And then when Muslims came back, they started philosophizing about why they didn't join Battle of Uhud, spinning what they've done as an Islamic act. Human beings are always very interesting. They never change, right? So some of them said, oh, well, we worried, we had foresight, and we worried that the battle was not going to be good, so we wanted to remain back to be its last line of defense if things didn't go well. Others said, well, we stayed behind because we knew it was futile. This battle was futile. What's important is that these, economic functions in Medina would continue. Um, Another guy said, if all of us joined battle, what would happen to the contracts and business deals? And so I stayed behind to make sure that Medina's economy remained solid, in case the battle didn't go well, then we needed it. And the Quran, in rather swift fashion, comes in and says, all of this is nonsense. Allah knows what is in your heart. And Allah knows that all of these are elaborate excuses for basically being cowards. It is not that these functions are not important, but it is what draws you to these functions is that you're cowardly. You could go to battle and you could die, and Allah will find a replacement for you. But the cowardliness, and so the expression, they want to be praised for what they haven't done. But note that their fate, فَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّهُمْ بِمَفَازَةٍ مِنَ الْعَذَابِ وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. They will receive their punishment. Now, this is an example of mutashabih, because it addresses a specific situation. But what is the muhkam from it? The muhkam from it is that if you spin things to make yourself sound like what you're not, you have something to worry about when it comes to Allah. Because Allah knows what's in your heart and knows you're lying. Okay. Now, we come to the crescendo, the closing, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then, as we saw in Surah Al-Baqarah, comes and says to us, this is 189, وَلِلَّهِ مُلْكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ إن خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار لآيات لأولي الألباب الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم ويتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا سبحانك فقنا عذاب النار ربنا إنك من تدخل النار فقد أخزيته وما للظالمين من أنصار ربنا إننا سمعنا مناديا ينادي للإيمان أن آمنوا بربكم فآمنا ربنا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار. This is 193. ربنا وآتنا ما وعدتنا على رسلك ولا تخزنا يوم القيامة إنك لا تخلف الميعاد فاستجاب لهم ربهم إني لا أضيع عمل عامل منكم من ذكر أو أنثى بعضكم من بعض فالذين هاجروا وأخرجوا من ديارهم وأوذوا في سبيلي وقاتلوا وقتلوا لأكفرن عنهم سيئاتهم ولأدخلنهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار ثوابا من عند الله والله عنده حسن الثواب. لا يغرنك تقلب الذين كفروا في البلاد متاع قليل ثم مأواهم جهنم وبئس المهاد. لكن الذين اتقوا ربهم لهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها نزلا من عند الله وما عند الله خير للأبرار. So comes the end, you have this very intimate, beautiful supplication and prayer. Having taken you through this whole journey, once again, Allah tells you battles, conflict, turmoil, tests, what it's all about is that this universe has an owner. This universe has a designer. Who are the true winners in this existence? Are those who, while standing up or laying down, are constantly in Allah's dhikr. What is undermined is their God. Not all the other things, their God. And they consistently think of God and consistently reflect, affirming in themselves the knowledge that Allah created all of this for a reason, for a purpose, whether we understand it or not. And the rest of this heartwarming prayer, where basically you are supplicating and saying, we've heard you. And once we've heard you, we understood and we surrendered. And then Allah comes and says, فَاسْتَجَابَ لَهُمْ رَبُّهُمْ أَنِّي لَا أُضَيِّعُ عَمَلَ عَامِلٍ مِنْكُمْ مِنْ ذَكَرٍ أَوْ أُنْثَى بَعْضُكُمْ مِنْ بَعْضٍ. Allah answers their call and says, whether man or woman, I don't waste what you do. I'm fully cognizant. بعضكم من بعض. You are from each other's. Here, as Muhammad Asad, I believe it was Muhammad Asad. I should check because I don't remember. Yeah, so Muhammad Asad says, be it man or woman, each of you is an issue of the other. The footnote says, you are all members of one and same human race and therefore equal to one another. And that's the point that I wanted to make. He's absolutely right. بَعْضُكُمْ مِنْ بَعْض, meaning you are from one another. You are same like one another. You are equal. There's no difference between you. Far more important than the statement that Islamophobes and ignorant Muslims love to go to, لِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهُنَّ دَرَجَةً, the one we dealt with, that men have a degree, because that's mu'allal, that's explained by supporting ability. Here it's innate. So innately you are ba'dukum min ba'd. And I would add, not just gender, not just man and woman, but race as well. You are from one another. You are same like one another. There's no difference. And what matters is what you do. So when it comes to those who sacrificed their home, migrated for my cause, and suffered and were hurt and sacrificed, then Allah will respond to these sacrifices. And again, Allah knows that this path of sacrifice, which we all summarize, that Allah wants from you, is a difficult one, because you will see those who live without a principle, without an anchor, that they look like they are dominating the world. تقلبهم في البلاد, that they go everywhere, they do everything. But in there is no meaning, so don't be fooled in thinking that there is a meaning. And then, remarkably, the Quran comes back after having warned you that note that you will hear a lot of horrible things from people of the book. They will hurt you. But then it comes back again in Ali Imran to remind you at the end that there are people of the book who are pious, who are conscientious, who are moral, who are ethical. And for those people, they will be rewarded accordingly by Allah. This is obviously 199. And then one of the most famous summary Quranic commands or advice: يا أيها الذين آمنوا صابروا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اصبروا وصابروا ورابطوا واتقوا الله لعلكم تفلحون. Believers, you want the nutshell of it. صابروا, اصبروا, persevere. Sabiru is to be diligently persevering, is to struggle to persevere. Warabitu, stand firm. Wattaqullah. When I came to the United States as an undergraduate at Yale, I was very lonely. First time away from my home. First time in the US, had no clue what the heck is going on. And I was going through a very severe cultural shock. And living in the dorms with people who had very, very different value system than my own, I was having a very hard time. And I remember one of my teachers heard from my family that I was having a very hard time and that they were worried that I was going to quit and go back. And I remember I received a card from him. And the card only said this ayah: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اصبروا وصابروا ورابطوا واتقوا الله لعلكم تفلحون. That's it. And when I read it, I broke down crying. because it was the summary of everything. What you must do is to be patient, to be a fighter, to persevere, and to stand firm. And not run away. Okay, let's take 2 minutes and then I will summarize Ali Imran, inshallah, the whole journey. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, recall that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used the occasion of a major tribulation and hardship to educate Muslims on the ethics of the response. We know what transpired, what took place, and the way that the Quran approaches it is truly remarkable. First, it comes and it says, okay, before we talk about this battle, let's talk about the concept itself. Two parties in conflict, one that is supposed to be on the side of God, and one is the other. And you understand that Allah has repeatedly promised to be with you and promised to aid you if you are on God's side. So, what do we learn from the fact that things went wrong in this situation? And what Allah chooses to start with is truly remarkable. Because Allah starts with, you have to understand that as you unpack these events and reflect about what happened, and you learn and you educate yourself about what happened, that when it comes to Allah's teachings, what are basic foundational moral principles, Kitab, are one thing. And then the many variables that arise because of exigencies are another. And that this education itself will take you to exigencies. But what matters is that you anchor yourself in the foundational moral principles. And right off, it pulls you back and says, when you evaluate it must be very clear, if you are the party of God, who the mulk belongs to. Because if you are in this battle thinking that the mulk is yours, it's a non-starter. But there is a practical effect to this, that if you understand the way that Allah deals in Allah's mulk, you will also understand that Allah لا يطلعكم على الغيب. That Allah, as Ali Imran says, that Allah will not share the ghaib with you, the world of the unknown. Which means that you function in history, but you do not see the full expanse of history. And Allah then takes you to a remarkable example of humble, pious people who ultimately make profound sacrifices that at the time looked like they were like tons of other sacrifices. When John the Baptist is executed, there were many others like John the Baptist who were executed by the Romans. However, from this very modest beginning, what unfolded in history was something completely unforeseeable and unpredictable. So, when you engage in these struggles, do not become obsessed with controlling the results. Only concern yourself with undertaking the methodical, correct steps. So, what are those steps that you must absolutely anchor yourself in as a party of God? Now that you understand that the future belongs to God, and you just do what you need to be focused on and leave the results to God, then what is it that you need to be focused on? And what unfolds is a literal curriculum of moral norms. Central to this is that you must be قوامين بالقسط, that you must be those who are focused in upholding the principle of justice. And understand, as a corollary to this, if you are people that exterminate advocates of justice, that suffocate, kill off advocates of justice, it's a non-starter. You are also to be people who must be focused on achieving mahabbatillah, to be loved by God and to love God. And God loves just. What God loves is well known. Remarkably, Ali Imran reminds us that God's love is not according to dietary laws that are age old, that come from the time of the Prophet Yaqub. God's law is not pedantic. It is not about a race. It's not about ethnicity. It's not about a class. It's not about a chosen people. It's not about dietary laws. It is about moral values that are transcendental. Core to your quest for justice and the journey to love God and be loved by God, and to your role as the party of God, is to understand that everything must be anchored in al-i'tisam bihablillah, in holding on to Allah's rope. Which means what? Which means holding on to the center of your moral universe being the dynamic interrelationship between al-kitab, revelation, and hikmah, and wisdom. If you do not care about what role the kitab lives in your life and what role al-hikmah, wisdom, plays in your life, and in understanding the interplay and the interconnections between the book and wisdom, then you have a problem. And core to this is the quest to be Rabbaniyun, is the quest to be godly people. And as we know that godliness at its heart and core is the concept of birr. And as we said, birr in essence is virtue. Al-Bar is a virtuous human being. A human being who deals with all from a virtuous perspective. But also understand that any attempt to explore virtue on the basis of the book and revelation and wisdom, etc., that is a mirage unless your relationship with material things is constantly interrogated and vetted out. It's not a theoretical construct, is unless you actually spend. All of this leads us to a very core concept. An ummah centered on justice, an ummah centered on godliness, an ummah centered on virtue, an ummah centered on the principle of caring financially for the other. This is because this ummah has a charge and an obligation and a role to play. And the charge and obligation and the role to play is to bear witness for Allah by enjoining the good, al-amr bil-ma'ruf and nahy anil munkar, by investigating, understanding, comprehending, exploring, pursuing, and enforcing what is good as to opposed to what is not good. But in order to do this, understand you have a dual challenge. In terms of your social dynamics, your value system have to have the right source of influence. You cannot hang around the bitana, those who you draw close to you, whose conceptions of what is good and what is bad has nothing to do with godliness. Because there are many conceptions of good and bad that have nothing to do with godliness. Remember, if you have a tribe, for instance, that is a cannibalistic tribe, and they think it's a good thing when you defeat your enemy, you eat the bodies of your enemy, because if you eat the bodies of your enemy, then they will never gain power over you again because you defeat their souls. Well, that conception of good, if you take this as batana to you, this is an extreme example, well, that's a disaster. So, being socially, culturally, politically smart, but at the same time, this can never lead you into the injustice of unwarranted generalizations about the others. Al-amr bil-ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar must be anchored on discernment and fairness, knowing who shares your value system and who doesn't share your value system. And the party of God, this party, has a socio-political ethic in that party. What are these socio-political? They're al-af, al-rifq, wa-shura. Forgiveness, kindness, and consultation. If you are harsh with one another, vengeful with one another, vindictive with one another, then it won't work. In other words, you must be a true ummah. Your love for God must make you love one another. If you don't have that love towards one another, that fundamental empathy, then again we have a problem. But in turn, for that to occur, you must understand, look at your role in your failures. When you experience disasters, calamities, hardships, misery, Don't look for who you can blame, whose fault it is. It is. Look at what in your life opened the door for shaitan to come in and compound that misery upon you. If you're honest with yourself, you'll always see plenty of things that you do that open the door for shaitan. If you're dishonest, you're going to minimize these things and say, oh, but they're not that bad. Let me focus on what this person does who's much worse. And significantly then, Ali Imran closes with two pieces of advice. Again reminds you, the party of God is fair. It discerns, it discriminates. It doesn't condemn sweeply, as we see in the Bible, where, go in and execute all this and do that and do this. And two, sabr, al-musabara, wal-ribat, wal-taqwa. These four things. Patience, perseverance, diligence, and piety. And with this, the lesson of the defeat in Uhud becomes a transformation. I don't remember who was it that wrote Uhud might have been a military defeat, but it was, I forgot how he put it, but it was a moral jubilation or something to that effect. That defeat through Al Imran became a methodical lesson in the moral structure of the Ummah and the anchoring, the realization that the thermometer for whether this Ummah deserves Allah's support or not is the core principle of al-amr bil-ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar. That's why the Mu'tazila made it the sixth pillar of Islam. That, quite bluntly, are you a society that takes morality, what is good, what is just, what is virtuous, seriously? Or do you just concern yourself with making a living and then spin morality, spin your sense of right and wrong, largely in response to whatever material and career interests that might come up as you're going about? So something is right or wrong depending on how it affects me personally, and that's it. Alhamdulillah. Okay, that's Surah Ali Imran.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think I can speak for everyone in saying that this was truly amazing and such a gift. The fact that never before Surah Imran, I think as you told us offline or maybe on camera too, has never been thematically pulled together. And this is even the way that you present the summary and pull it all together is truly stunning. And I think we are truly just in your gratitude forever. This is incredible. So let me start by just sharing some of the highlights for this particular session, for day 5, the things that we covered. So the points about the compounding of sorrows and how this is an opportunity for cleansing and an opportunity for elevation. And the point is for us to look within and to be honest and to confront ourselves, and to learn the lessons that God intends for us and to elevate. And that the fact that there are sorrows upon sorrows and hardship means that we are in God's eye, and that oftentimes that those who appear to have everything, wealth and comfort, those are the people that God has tended to look away, and forgotten. So it's such a powerful way to understand the sorrows upon sorrows, and the fact that there is no coincidence or no accident that when it rains it pours, that multiple things happen, that it's truly an opportunity. I thought that the analogy that you gave us, to Muslim Spain was so powerful, that we live in a time where we would be the equivalent of the people outside, or the Spanish, I guess, who were looking at how successful Muslims were, and that our understanding of this is that we have a limited scope or a limited view in history, that we are not expected at this point in time to have victory or the solutions to victory, but it's our job to think seriously about what we can do, to emerge from the state that we're in. And it's so important because when you see it from outside, that the Spanish were able to emerge and become a colonial power. Obviously that's not what we want, but the point is that we are in such a dark time now that our job as Muslims is to do everything that we can in our power to think ahead and see what we can do to emerge. And that we can't change the world unless we start by changing ourselves and our families, and that it's too easy for people to point the finger and blame others, but we have to start with ourselves. And the lesson about to us about, despite all the pain, betrayal, suffering, or things that we may, trauma that we may have experienced, as the Prophet, peace be upon him, was told, it's not appropriate to bear a grudge. And that was a different translation than most translations have, which is extremely powerful. And that when all of these things have happened in failure and thinking about, what went wrong, that people tend to justify themselves, and they can even begin to blame the message. So, but God is saying that this is, don't blame the message, don't blame the messenger, but look inward and look at yourself, because the message is what is constant and the variable is your role in that. And it's important to be honest and not to just make excuses. For example, when people were giving all the reasons why they didn't fight and turning it into something Islamic, that God ultimately knows what is truthful and what's in your hearts, and that God was telling those people that you were at that point closer to kufr than iman, and that was another way that we saw how God speaks according to the audience that he's addressing in a very different, in a very powerful way. Verse 169, that fighting and dying for a cause, that death is not what we think, and that's in God's purview, and that the qualities of cowardliness, greed, selfishness, all of these things are from shaitani influence, or from the shaitan, and that people who are wali Allah, or friends of God, or close to God, shaitan has no hold over them. That Imran truly sets the standard for Muslims and for humanity, for believers, that you must have solid faith, be in a constant state of remembrance of God, or dhikr, and sacrifice material things, and that it's important to teach the Surah based in reality. What oftentimes has happened is people let Muslims off the hook, but if they really understand the reality of the situation, that actually is more powerful. Ultimately, are you foul or pure? And again, coming back to the idea of the two two groups, whether you are with God or without. Very interestingly, the Quran never calls for the silencing of critics and allows for slander, and points out that these types of polemics will always be a constant. And if you weaken, then you will have failed in patience and piety, or sabr and taqwa. And so importantly, verse 195, saying that you are the same, whether it's male, female, and extending that to gender or any other distinction, that we are all human beings, we are all equal, and there's just so much that can be built from that. That Allah knows that this path is difficult, that Allah knows that there are people who look like they have everything, but that is meaningless. That we, again, despite hurt that will come from people of the book, we have to have ethical discernment. We have to know that some of the people of the book will be good, and the rewards are with God for those people. And that if in the final, as you summarized, the 4 points, patience, perseverance, diligence, and piety are what will carry us through that very beautiful last part. Alhamdulillah, there's truly amazing. I guess what we should talk about some other time is if the next session we do Q&A, right? So if you guys have questions for Surah Imran, please email them to me, grace@usuli.org, and I guess we will just probably dedicate then Tuesday, right, to Q&A. So thank you for being with us. This has been a fabulous, incredible night, a present to all of us on Christmas. This is the best Christmas present that Muslims could get. So, finishing Surah Imran. Thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and inshallah we will see you on Tuesday. Assalamu alaikum.